Well, to the budget. Look, if we're to be objective about the budget, then today's newspaper headlines most probably help. One says, super spender event. Another, hefty price to win back aged care trust. Another, Liberals spend big, lock-in deficits. Another, cash splash to win back women. $18 billion splurge on old Aussies. Cashing in at the ballot box. Debt on track for $1 trillion. Pandemic treasurer unveils $96 billion in new spending to help vaccinate government against losing office. Jobs, spending and deficits. Another, coalition changes tune. The government's announced a spending splurge worth $74.6 billion. Now, this is a Liberal government. Well, not really. I noted the Treasurer last night kept referring to the Morrison government. If it weren't for the National Party, the Liberals may not be in government. It's a coalition government. But this budget stands traditional Liberal philosophy and ideology on its head. Labor could not have dreamt of this stuff. Yet paradoxically, everything that Labor would believe they could take to an election, whether it be childcare, aged care, Indigenous, mental health, women's safety, Labor have been gazumped by this budget. Of course, the argument is, and it's true, we are one of the stronger performing economies in the world, but debt and deficits no longer seem to matter. The budget deficit will be, quote unquote, just $57 billion in 2024-25. The net debt, 24-25, net, $980 billion. I wonder what an intelligent 16-year-old is thinking. We've mortgaged their futures. Yet Josh Frydenberg identified all this as, quote, a strong economy, and, quote, this is what the coalition stands for. Well, I worked for a Liberal Prime Minister as senior advisor and speechwriter. I was the only one. And the only time he ever threw a tantrum with a draft speech that I gave to him was when I left out the words, quote, we all must remember governments have no money of their own other than what they take from the taxpayer. Well, what then do we make of this? Chris Richardson is an outstanding commentator and presenter on economic trends, a partner of Deloitte Access Economics, and an influential budget monitor. And Chris joins me. Chris, thank you for your time. I was confused, Chris, when the Treasurer said this. Listen to this.
Our strong economy. This is what the coalition stands for.
This is what the coalition stands for. And then the constant reference to the Morrison government, Chris. Listen to this.
In the Morrison government's plan, the Morrison government has committed. The Morrison government.
Chris, without the National Party, there wouldn't be in government. And just, I want you to comment on this. You also said that the budget, listen to this.
It is a plan that is guided by our enduring values. Reward for effort, the power of persuasion and aspiration and enterprise, upholding personal responsibility and always providing a helping hand to those who need it. This is what the coalition stands for.
Chris Richardson, Liberal Party's enduring values, this is what the coalition stands for. You and I have been around for a while. Debt and deficit, do they no longer matter?
Debt and deficits absolutely matter. And you mentioned that deficit several years down the track, the middle of this decade, the last year that Treasury forecasts in detail, 2024-25, with a deficit there of $57 billion. By the middle of this decade, COVID should be behind us, and we should, by that stage, be looking to repair the budget. Having said that, debt matters, but its great partner, interest rates, matter. And this is the first time in Australian history where we have seen a collapse in interest rates of this magnitude. And I must admit, I'm not as worried about the debt. That emergency spending, it cost a hell of a lot. But if you look at the true cost of the debt, the actual cost of the debt, the net interest payments the government's making, compare it to national income, it's lower today.
Sure.
And lower over the next 4 years than it was before COVID hit.
I take that point, and of course what they would do, they'd be hoping they would grow the economy to an extent that they would be able to cover interest rates, because the cost of interest, because interest is so low. But Chris, your estimation is, where are interests going? I mean, can we be guaranteed that they're going to stay here? What the hell happens if interest rates start to rise?
Oh yeah, now again though, the good news is we already borrowed the vast bulk of the emergency money at the lowest rates we ever had. So, most of that is locked away for 10 years. Some of it is locked away for even longer than that. And although you can and should expect interest rates to eventually rise, you should hope, in fact, interest rates eventually rise, because that will be a sign that economies, including our own, are repairing. It probably is still some way off. We need to get unemployment down first, underemployment down first. That will finally get wage growth moving, and eventually then you'll get faster inflation.
If I could just take those 2 points, excellent points, Chris, the unemployment and underemployment. Now, normally we would say, and I've written about this tomorrow in the Daily Telegraph, normally say, oh, well, migration will help this. If we don't have migration and we don't have international students, we don't have tourists, and we don't have skilled labour, we don't have the backpackers, how do we get unemployment and underemployment down? Are we going to retrain people who have never worked, they're currently in the workforce on welfare? How do we manage that?
Yeah, and indeed, it hurts the Australian economy that flexibility that we used to have, the people movement in and out. It didn't happen for the hell of it. It happened for reasons. We needed people with particular skills here. At times, the world needed Australians elsewhere. Yeah. And the lack of that genuinely hurts. Having said that, we do have momentum in the economy. And there is, I'm happy to see the government be the most ambitious on unemployment of any government for some decades. Something happened in the last 20 years, not just in Australia, but around the world. A given amount of economic growth started to show up more in jobs and less in wages. And that's it's absolutely playing through.
Is there a problem there about wage growth? I mean, there has been no wage growth. Is that a problem? Is it an electoral liability? Has this budget blunted Labor's electoral pitch? Childcare, aged care, mental health?
Yeah, look, absolutely, and that was clearly not an accident. You can kind of think of three things coming together. Yeah. Economists are saying there's a good case to drive unemployment down. They had a genuine policy need to spend more in areas like aged care. That needed to be done, and it generates jobs. But of course, that gives you both the economic need of driving unemployment down. It gives you the policy hit to areas that needed it, like aged care. But it also improves the government's chance of re-election.
That's the issue.
I'm sure that crossed their mind as well.
I think you're right. Is the coalition here, though, against its history, its ideology, and the instincts of its supporters being dragged towards a bigger role for government? We've seen this with managing the coronavirus. The government's taken back a string of personal freedoms. Now it's taking away this essential independence of Australians and making many dependent on government. How do you see that?
And we are seeing, in the middle of this decade, hopefully COVID well and truly in the rearview vision mirror. Yes, government is currently set to be a bigger part of the economy. In the specifics, though, it is things like aged care and the NDIS. And it's kind of hard to argue that those two don't deserve more money. Mm-hmm. The national conversation, and I have no trouble now with the government spending money to drive unemployment down. What worries me is that this has kicked the can down the road of the national discussion of eventually how we pay for it. That's and you don't need to pay for it. We need to focus today on fighting the virus, on getting unemployment down. I'm happy for that to be the focus. But down the track, you want a strong budget again. The strong budget we had when this crisis arrived was a thing of beauty. It made the economics and the politics of fighting off COVID. I mean, you were noting how much better than we've done than other economies around the world. Yes. You look at the rich nations, the 21 rich nations around the world that Australia usually compares ourselves to. So far, we are the only one with more jobs today than when COVID hit.
Yes, this is true. Can I just take you on that aged care thing? Because I know there's 147 recommendations from the Royal Commission, and the announcement last night was for 5 years, which quite surprised me, 17.7 billion, which is about $3.5 billion a year. Now, those people in the aged care industry say it's so bad that will only address the absence of home care places rather than the wages and conditions of those people in aged care. Is that going to be the 17.7 billion over 5 years? I mean, it's an awful lot of money. Is it going to get them out of the aged care mess?
It's more money than I expected. True, by the way, not just in aged care, but pretty much across everything. There was more new money than I expected. In the last year, it's a bit over $5 billion. Now, some people have been saying 10 or 11 billion per year may be needed to solve all of aged care's problems. It's hard to know. And to be fair, you cannot change a big system like that fast. It is too big. You think several years ago when there were underspends in disability insurance, the NDIS, and people said, oh, the government's trying to repair its budget. No, it wasn't. You know, it was a big system that couldn't grow as fast.
Right,
yeah, we may not get there with that $5 billion a year.
Just before you go, what can Albanese now do tomorrow night?
And look, I'll leave the politics to the politicians. But we've heard the easy stuff, the extra spending. And again, you know, I'm glad to see it. Much of it needed to be done and it drives unemployment down. And that's a grand thing. But it does make the life of an opposition harder than otherwise.
Good to talk to you, Chris. I hope we can talk again. Always love your analysis. Thank you for the great work you do. There is Chris Richardson from Deloitte Economics.